Captain James Torres had seen the aftermath of battles before, but the ruins of Settlement Epsilon 7 were something else entirely. The Crixian raiders had swept through with their usual brutal efficiency, structures demolished, supplies looted, survivors few and far between. His peacekeeping unit moved through the debris carefully, searching for anyone who might have hidden during the attack. The settlement had housed roughly 300 Thishan colonists. Current survivor count, 42. Captain. Sergeant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. Northeast quadrant, collapsed residential building. I've got. You need to see this. James made his way through the rubble to find Chen standing outside what had once been a family dwelling. Inside, wedged in a gap between fallen support beams, was a child. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, a Thishan girl with the characteristic navy blue skin and silver hair of her species. Her golden eyes stared at James with a mixture of terror and defiance. She was clutching something to her chest, protecting it even in her fear. "Hey there," James said softly, crouching down to her level. "I'm Captain Torres. I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" The girl said nothing, just pressed herself further back into the gap. "She hasn't spoken since we found her," Chen said quietly. "Been in there for probably 2 days based on the timeline of the attack. Won't come out, won't respond to anything." James studied the child more carefully. No visible injuries, but traumatized beyond words. And that thing she was clutching, he could see it now. A military medal, Thishan design, the kind awarded to decorated officers. "That medal," James said gently to the girl. "Did it belong to someone in your family?" For the first time, the girl reacted. Her eyes flicked down to the medal, then back to James. A single nod. "Your father, mother." A hesitation, then she touched the medal to her chest in a gesture James recognized from Thishan cultural briefings, the sign for family, for love, for those lost. Both parents, then, probably killed in the raid. "What's your name?" James tried again, keeping his voice soft and unthreatening. The girl's lips moved soundlessly as if she'd forgotten how to speak. Finally, barely audible, "Lyra. Lyra, that's a beautiful name." James slowly extended his hand, palm up, non-threatening. "Lyra, it's not safe here. The bad people who did this might come back. I need to take you somewhere safe. Will you come with me?" "No safe." Her voice was small, broken. "Nowhere safe. They killed everyone. Mama said hide. I hid. Everyone died anyway." James felt something crack in his chest. He'd seen war orphans before. It was an inevitable tragedy of conflict zones. But something about this little girl, clutching her parents' medal in the ruins of her entire world, struck him differently. "I know it doesn't feel safe right now," he said. "But I promise you I won't let anything happen to you. That's what soldiers do. We protect people, especially brave girls who survive impossible things." "I'm not brave. I hid while Mama and Papa died." "Surviving is brave, Lyra. Your parents told you to hide because they wanted you to live. You honored their wish. That took courage." Slowly, achingly slowly, Lyra extended one small hand toward James. He took it carefully, feeling how small and fragile it was in his grip, and helped her crawl out of her hiding place. When she emerged fully, he saw she was painfully thin, 2 days without food or water, probably too terrified to move. He lifted her gently, and she didn't resist, just clutched her parents' metal and pressed her face against his shoulder. "I've got you," James said quietly. "You're safe now." The refugee processing center was chaos. 42 survivors meant 42 stories of loss, 42 cases of trauma, 42 people needing medical care, psychological support, and rehousing. The Thishan Empire's relief agencies were overwhelmed. James had stayed with Lyra through the initial medical examination. She refused to let him leave, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. The physician confirmed what he'd suspected: malnutrition, dehydration, shock, but no physical injuries. "She's lucky," the doctor said. "Physically, she'll recover with proper care." And psychologically, the doctor's expression was grim. "She witnessed her parents murder, Captain. She's 6 years old and completely alone in the universe. Lucky is relative." The social services coordinator was a harried Thishan female named Caravan who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She reviewed Lyra's case with professional detachment born of necessity. "No living relatives," she confirmed, scanning the database. Both parents were only children, all grandparents deceased. No siblings, no extended family registered in the system. She sighed. "She'll go into the orphan relocation program. There's a facility on Thisha Prime that specializes in war orphans. They do good work, all things considered." "All things considered," James repeated. "They're understaffed, underfunded, and currently housing 300 children in a facility designed for 150. But they keep them alive and educated, which is more than many orphanages can claim." Caravan's tone was defensive. "It's not ideal, but it's what we have." James looked through the observation window at Lyra, sitting on a medical bed, still clutching that medal. A nurse was trying to coax her into drinking some water. "What if there was another option?" he heard himself say. Caravan looked up from her datapad. "What kind of option? What if someone wanted to take responsibility for her? Provide personal care instead of institutional placement." "You mean adoption?" Caravan's expression was skeptical. "Captain, cross-species adoption is extremely rare. The legal complications alone, but it's possible. Technically, yes. Under Thishan law, any adult of sound mind and stable circumstances can petition for guardianship, regardless of species. But the process is extensive. Background checks, psychological evaluations, home studies, financial verification. It takes months, sometimes years. What about emergency foster placement? Temporary guardianship while the adoption process completes?" Caravan studied him carefully. "Why are you asking this, Captain?" James didn't have a good answer. He barely knew this child. He was a career military officer with no family of his own, no experience raising children, no permanent home beyond military housing. By any rational measure, he was possibly the worst candidate for parenthood. But he kept seeing Lyra's face when she'd finally emerged from her hiding place. The desperate hope mixed with absolute terror, the way she'd trusted him despite everything. "Because she shouldn't have to face this alone," he said finally. "Because I made her a promise that I'd keep her safe, and dumping her in an overcrowded orphanage doesn't feel like keeping that promise." "Captain, that's admirable, but how do I start the process?" Caravan was silent for a long moment. Then she pulled up a different screen on her datapad. "I'll need extensive documentation. Military service record, financial statements, psychological evaluation, character references. And you'll need to speak with Lyra herself. She's old enough that her preference matters in placement decisions." "I understand, Captain." Caravan's expression softened slightly. "I've processed hundreds of orphan cases. Most people express sympathy and then move on. The fact that you're willing to actually commit to this, it's unusual. But I'll warn you, raising a traumatized war orphan is not like having a normal child. The nightmares, the behavioral issues, the grief, it's overwhelming even for experienced parents." "I'm a soldier," James said. "Overwhelming situations are my specialty." The conversation with Lyra was harder than any combat briefing James had ever given. He sat beside her bed in the medical center, trying to find words that a 6-year-old trauma survivor could understand and process. "Lyra, I need to talk to you about what happens next." She looked at him with those two old eyes, already bracing for more loss. "The people here want to send you to a special home with other children who lost their families," James continued. "It's safe, they'll take care of you, make sure you have food and a place to sleep." "You're leaving me." It wasn't a question. Just resignation. "That's the thing, I don't want to. If you're willing, I'd like to take care of you myself. Not as a soldier assigned to protect you, but as family." Lyra stared at him. "You want to be my family. I know I'm not Thishan, I'm human, and I'm a soldier, and I don't know much about raising children, but I made you a promise that I'd keep you safe, and I want to keep making that promise every day, if you'll let me." "Why?" The word was small, confused. "You don't know me. I know you're brave. I know you survived something terrible. I know you loved your parents enough to keep their medal even when you had nothing else." James chose his words carefully. "I can't replace your mama and papa, Lyra. No one can, but I can give you a home, a family, someone who cares about you, if you want that." Lyra was quiet for a long time, her small fingers tracing the edges of her father's medal. Finally, "Will you keep me even if I'm sad, even if I have nightmares? Especially then. Even if I cry a lot. Even if you cry every day. Even if I'm bad sometimes." James's throat tightened. "Lyra, you could never be bad enough for me to leave you. That's what family means. We stay together no matter what. That's the promise." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her blue face. "I miss my mama and papa." "I know you do, sweetheart, and it's okay to miss them. They'll always be your parents, always be in your heart. I'm not trying to take their place. I'm just trying to make sure you're not alone." Lyra launched herself at him, wrapping small arms around his neck and sobbing into his shoulder. James held her carefully, letting her grief pour out, making quiet, soothing sounds. When she finally calmed enough to speak, her voice was muffled against his uniform. "Okay, okay. I want to stay with you, be family." James felt something settle in his chest, a decision that felt more right than anything he'd done in his entire military career. "Then we're family, Lyra, starting right now." The paperwork took 3 months. During that time, Lyra lived in temporary foster care on the military base, but James visited every day. He brought her books, helped her with the therapy sessions required by social services, and slowly, carefully began building trust. The nightmares were intense. Lyra would wake screaming about raiders, about fire, about hiding while her parents died. James learned to respond quickly, to hold her and remind her she was safe until the terror faded. The grief came in waves. Some days she was almost normal, playing with other children in the base's family housing area. Other days she was inconsolable, crying for her mother, clutching that medal and rocking herself. James adapted. He learned Thishan lullabies from cultural databases. He studied childhood trauma with the same intensity he'd once studied military tactics. He rearranged his entire life around a 6-year-old's needs. His fellow officers thought he was crazy. "Tors, you're a career military officer. What are you doing playing house with an alien orphan?" But his commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Parks, understood. "I've known you for 10 years, James. I've never seen you care about anything as much as you care about that little girl. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in a Thishan administrative office. James signed the documents, so many documents, while Lyra sat beside him, swinging her legs and clutching her parents' medal. "Congratulations," the administrator said. "By the authority of the Thishan Empire, Lyraesh is now legally your daughter. All rights and responsibilities of parenthood are transferred to you, Captain Tors." James looked at Lyra, his daughter, officially, and felt overwhelming terror mixed with fierce protectiveness. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" She slipped her small hand into his. "Ready, Papa." The word hit him like a physical impact. Papa. She'd been calling him James for 3 months, carefully maintaining distance. "But now, you called me Papa," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Is that okay? I had a papa before, but he's gone. Can I have a new papa, or is that wrong?" James knelt down to her level. "It's not wrong at all. I'm honored to be your papa, Lyra, more honored than I can say." She smiled, a real smile, the first he'd seen from her, and hugged him tightly. The news spread through military channels first. Human officer adopts Thishan war orphan. It was unusual enough to be noteworthy, but not unprecedented. Interspecies adoption, while rare, happened occasionally in the aftermath of conflicts. What happened next, no one expected. 2 weeks after the adoption finalized, James received a formal summons to appear before the Thishan Imperial Council. Not a request, a summons with all the weight of imperial authority behind it. "What did you do?" Colonel Parks asked, reviewing the document with concern. "Nothing. I adopted a little girl and I've been raising her. That's it." "Well, apparently the Thishan Empire wants to talk to you about it. This summons came from the Empress herself. The Imperial Council chamber was magnificent, all crystalline architecture and formal protocol. James stood at attention in his dress uniform, acutely aware that he was a human captain facing the ruling body of a civilization millions strong. Empress Velshara sat on the central throne, flanked by council members. She was imposing even for a Thician, tall, regal, with silver hair woven with precious metals and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Captain James Torres," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You stand before this council to answer for your actions regarding Lyraesh, orphan of settlement Epsilon 7. James's heart sank. They were going to reverse the adoption, take Lyra away from him. He should have known it was too good to be true. "We have reviewed your case extensively," the Empress continued. "The reports from social services, the psychological evaluations, the testimony of those who have observed you with the child, and we have discussed the implications of what you have done." She stood, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. "Captain Torres, you are a human officer with no obligation to our people beyond your peacekeeping duties. When you found Lyraesh, you could have processed her through standard channels and moved on. Instead, you chose to take personal responsibility for a traumatized child of a species not your own. You underwent months of invasive evaluation, rearranged your entire life, and committed yourself to raising her with no expectation of recognition or reward." The Empress descended from her throne and approached him. James remained at attention, uncertain what was happening. "In the aftermath of the Crixian raids, we have processed over 15,000 orphaned children," she said quietly, so only he could hear. 15,000 children who lost everything. Our systems are overwhelmed. Our orphanages are overcrowded. And most of these children will grow up in institutions, never knowing the individual love and attention of a dedicated parent. She placed her hand on his shoulder, an unprecedented gesture from the Empress to a foreign military officer. "But not Lyraesh. Because one human soldier looked at one traumatized child and decided her life mattered more than his convenience. Your actions, Captain Torres, have reminded this empire what we've forgotten in our focus on systems and efficiency, that every child deserves someone who chooses them specifically, who commits to them completely." She stepped back and addressed the full council. "I hereby decree that Captain James Torres be granted honorary citizenship in the Thician Empire, with all rights and privileges thereof. Furthermore, as Lyraesh's adoptive father, he is granted the title of Lord Guardian, a position not bestowed in 3 generations. The chamber erupted in murmurs. James stood in shock. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. I just adopted a little girl. I didn't do anything special." "You did everything special," the Empress interrupted. "In a galaxy where most people prioritize their own comfort and convenience, you prioritized a child's well-being over your own life plans. In a time when species boundaries are used to justify indifference, You saw past them to recognize a child's fundamental need for love and family. She turned to address the chamber formally. Let the record show that this human, this soldier who had no obligation to our people, has demonstrated the highest ideals of Thishan culture: protection of the vulnerable, commitment to family, and sacrifice for those who cannot protect themselves. His actions shame those of us who have biological ties to these orphan children, yet do nothing to help them. The Empress's words rang through the chamber, and James saw council members shifting uncomfortably. Captain Tor's adoption of Lyraesh will be documented and disseminated throughout the empire, the Empress continued. Not as propaganda, but as example. If a human soldier can cross species barriers to give one child a loving home, what excuse do our own citizens have for not doing more? She returned to her throne. This council is adjourned. Captain Tors, you are dismissed with our gratitude and respect. The story spread across the Thishan Empire within days. Human soldier adopts war orphan. The empire went silent, not in condemnation but in reflection. Within a month, orphan adoption rates increased by 40%. Thishan citizens who had considered institutional care sufficient began reconsidering. Families who had hesitated over adding another child were inspired to act. James became inadvertently famous, though he hated the attention. He'd done this for Lyra, not for recognition. But Lyra was thriving. The nightmares decreased. The grief became manageable. She started school, made friends, and slowly began to heal. One evening, 6 months after the adoption, James was helping her with homework when she suddenly stopped and looked at him seriously. "Papa, why did you choose me?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "There were other kids in the settlement, other orphans. Why me?" James set down the data pad and pulled her into his lap. "Honestly, I don't know if I chose you or if you chose me. But the moment I saw you in that rubble, holding your father's medal and refusing to give up, I knew you were special. I knew you deserved someone who would fight for you as hard as you were fighting to survive. Do you wish you hadn't? It made your life complicated. Lyra, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Before you, I was just a soldier going through motions. Now I'm a father with a daughter who makes every day meaningful. That's not complicated, that's everything." She hugged him tightly. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, little star, forever." Later that night, after Lyra was asleep, James stood in her doorway watching her. Her father's medal sat on the nightstand beside her bed. She still kept it close, and James never asked her to put it away. Her parents would always be her parents. He was just the one who chose to walk the rest of her journey with her. He'd adopted her as a soldier, a simple act of doing what seemed right in the moment. And somehow, that single act had made an entire empire go silent and reconsider what it meant to truly care for their vulnerable. But James didn't care about empires or recognition. He cared about the little Thishan girl sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, secure in the knowledge that someone had chosen her, committed to her, and would never leave her. That was enough. That was everything.